Hi, everyone. This is Lori Mulberg. I'm going to be hanging out here in the background today and just taking care of some of the administrative parts of the event to help things run smoothly. So before we get started, just a few little housekeeping tips to help you all have a good meeting. We are, as I mentioned, or as you might have heard, recording this meeting, so you'll be able to view that after the event, and I'll send it along in an email once we're all wrapped up. If you do not wish to be included or recorded, you can toggle off your camera in the lower left, and you can also just choose to use chat instead of talking when you're asking questions or talking with the speakers. If you have any ideas or questions to share throughout the event, feel free to use the chat feature at the bottom, and you can chat and ask questions with the group at large or privately with other individual attendees throughout the meeting. So if you would like to see the names of other participants, you can click on the participant icon below. And if you spot an individual attendee or a friend on the list, go ahead and just send them a little private hello. Our chat moderators today are Virajita Singh and Abby Asojo, and they'll monitor and address comments from the chat as they come up and throughout the meeting. So we are also offering continuing education credit with AIA for this session. So you have to stay for at least 65 minutes in order to qualify for that. And if you requested that I report your participation to AIA in registration, I can take care of that for you. If you didn't, or if you forgot to, but would like to have that, you can just reply to me and let me know when I send out the email after the event. And if you don't need AIA credit, but you'd like a certificate, you can, I can send you that as well. All right, so let's go and start. Let me introduce our hosts for the series. This series was developed by 3 of our faculty members from the University of Minnesota College of Design. Abby Asojo, Associate Dean for Research, Creative Scholarship and Engagement, Professor of Interior Design at the college. Tom Fisher, who's our Director of the Minnesota Design Center and a Dayton Hudson Chair in Urban Design, and Virajita Singh, who is our Associate Vice Provost for the Office of Equity and Diversity, Adjunct Assistant Professor, and a Senior Research Fellow with the Center for Sustainable Building Research at the College of Design. Our featured speakers today are James Garrett, Jr., who's Managing Partner of Formula, Gabrielle Claudas, a Research Fellow with the Minnesota Design Center and CEO of Settled, and Jacob Mans, who is an architect with Decentralized Design Lab. You'll see his space today in the video, and assistant professor at the college. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom, and you'll learn more about our speakers in just a moment.
Great. Welcome, everybody. I'm Tom Fisher. Thank you, Lori. As some of you may know, this is part of an ongoing set of projects that we've had going on in the college looking at the post-pandemic world. My colleague Virajita Singh and I co-taught a class this summer looking at new venture design opportunities in the post-pandemic world. We have a podcast coming out of the center, a blog, and this webinar series is part of that. So we really do appreciate your contributions, your involvement in these issues. Today we're talking about the challenges of people experiencing homelessness. A federal study last year said that there are about, on any given night, about 550,000 Americans who are homeless. About 35% of that, about 200,000 people, are unsheltered on any given night. And about 65%, or about 350,000, are sheltered, but that is either in a shelter or unstably housed, sleeping on friends' couches or what have you. And so this is a major problem. We have more people experiencing homelessness in the United States than any other major developed country in the world. And the reason we're talking about this today is we also anticipate that there's a potential for this to get much worse. By some estimates, if we didn't have eviction moratoriums in place right now because of the pandemic, we could have as many as 2 million Americans experiencing homelessness. And as some states have begun to eliminate their eviction moratoriums, we're already starting to see the numbers increase. Certainly in the Twin Cities, we've seen tent encampments in our public parks. And so this is really a major issue of our time. And so we gathered three people who I think are some of the most creative individuals thinking about this and working on this issue, certainly in our region. And unlike what we've done in previous webinars, we're going to give them a lot of time to talk about their work and to think about how the pandemic might be affecting their work going forward, and then really enabling all of you to ask questions of them. So with that, I think we're going to start with my colleague at the center, Gabriel Cloudis, who is going to be talking about the work that she's been doing around homelessness with the faith community. And so Gabriel, if you want to share your screen.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so can everyone see me all right?
We can.
All right. You can see me?
We can, yeah.
Okay, great. All right. So speaking of like pandemic world, I've got a bed on one side of me and I've got a crib on the other. And so welcome into my bedroom. It's getting real and it's getting personal and it's getting real vulnerable here. So thank you, Tom, for introducing me. My name is Gabriel Cloudis. I'm a research fellow at the University of Minnesota. I'm also a PhD candidate in housing. So for the last 6 years, I've been studying housing along with exactly 2 other people at the University of Minnesota. So the 3 of us will solve housing. So essentially about 4 years ago, I was invited by the University of Minnesota, by Tom Fisher and by HCMC to look at homelessness in the Twin Cities. The CEO at the time, John Pryor, said, "Oh my gosh, the homeless are coming into our ERs feigning an illness, basically because the shelters are overrun or it's, really cold night and there's nowhere else for them to go." And so they end up in the ERs because we essentially live in a society where healthcare is kind of an entitlement. You can't turn someone away from the emergency room, but housing is not an entitlement. We all know that housing is a social determinant of health. So if you don't have housing, you're going to have pretty bad health. And so what that results in is a bill of about $1,500 a night for someone just coming into the ER looking for a bed and a meal. And guess who's paying for that? You are. That is the reality of this, is that this is tax dollars going towards maintaining homelessness. And it's incredibly costly. We did a research study of our highest users of emergency services from our unsheltered folks. And they cost on average $112,000 per person per year. So it's wild to keep people homeless. And so, I don't know, a raise of hands, who thinks that the reason that we are keeping people homeless is because we just don't have enough housing? Any hands? No? Okay. That we just don't have enough shelters? Okay. How about that people just don't want the homeless in their own backyards? Yeah. Okay. So I'm seeing some hands. Yeah. So I will say that the number one reason that we don't build enough affordable housing is this. I've started calling it a spirit. I think that it is alive and active and is really working towards keeping people out of housing. So this is not in my backyard spirit, NIMBYism. We all know it. We all fight it every day. And essentially that means, gosh, there is really extreme, strong stereotypes of who the homeless are and what kind of neighbor they're going to be. Now, our federal kind of mandate on how to respond to homelessness is called Housing First. And that's been a really important leap forward. For many decades, we made people jump through hoops to get into housing. And we said, hey, you come off the streets and you come into an emergency shelter and you follow our rules and you get into our programming, and then we'll move you up a little bit. And then you might get like a room with just 4 people. And then you might get into some transitional housing, but But essentially what happens was that they were dangling this carrot, trying to get people into housing, trying to like make them kind of follow the rules. And nobody ever ended up getting getting the carrot. So about 2.5 decades ago, a researcher said, oh my gosh, what if we would just give people the carrot? Then that might really help. And so what that, that's the housing first model. Essentially, that means that we lower the cost of that person on the public, and we do increase their housing stability. But there's essentially zero research that shows that we increase their social belonging, their participation in civic events, volunteerism, work opportunities. So essentially like all the things that make us human and want us to wake up in the morning, none of that increased. So we were just kind of warehousing people. Now, there was a group of people in Austin, Texas, 25 years ago, same time, that said, oh my gosh, it cannot just be lack of housing. Homelessness is not synonymous with houselessness. That can't be the case. And so what did they do? They were not scientific researchers. They were just a group of people that had a bunch of compassion and some empathy and decided, okay, we just got to learn about this. So they started going and sleeping on the streets of Austin, Texas, alongside the chronically homeless. And they heard lots and lots and lots of stories that were very varied and different. But the thing that they continued to hear was that there was stories of extreme neglect, abuse, violence from childhood. So as a society, we're responding to homelessness saying people just need housing. We need to just build more housing. Let's lobby the government for more money to build more housing. And that's fair, I suppose, but it might be based off the wrong assumption. Our hardest to house, most expensive to the public, the chronically homeless, don't just lack housing, they lack home. They lack that sense that we all have when we've been away from our home for a long time. We've been on an arduous journey, maybe too close with our family for too long. And we come home and we walk in the door and we go, we're home. That's what people are missing. That's what they don't have. And we don't know how to give people that. Except for that group of people in Austin, Texas. They're like, okay, I think people have experienced the profound and catastrophic loss of family, and that's led to the profound and catastrophic loss of community. And so how do we augment that? How do we augment the role of family and invite people into something? It's not going to be their biological family that's able to give them that sense of I'm home, right? Because oftentimes that was their tormentors or the people that, did the horrendous types of things. So what would it look like for the capital C community to rise up and wrap their arms around folks? So essentially, my PhD dissertation shifted gears. I was looking at global poverty. I had a big chip on my shoulder about homelessness in America. I'd been all over the world, looked at very impoverished communities, and felt like, okay, if you're living in the US, you're fine. Like, you have food, you have clothes, the government is here to help. And I, lo and behold, turns out as I started walking alongside my homeless brothers and sisters and going from camp to camp and actually putting a face to a name and getting to know people, I realized that no, most people are living in chronic pain, chronic hunger, chronic trauma and stress, and most importantly, chronic isolation. Homelessness is absolutely the result of extreme isolation. We are talking, the chronically homeless, we're talking about not only the hardest to house, most expensive, but we're talking about the most despised, unloved, unwanted of our society, right? You don't have to raise your hand, but when the last time you saw someone on the street corner with the sign, did you roll down your window and ask them how they were doing, look them in the eye, or want to just make the light turn green? And it's fine. That's where we all start, but I think that we can do better if we start to break down the stereotype and we start to instead ask, like, gosh, what did you do to get yourself there, you lazy drug addict? And we start to shift that and ask, like, what happened to you? what's your story? You know, like, what was childhood like? Where are you coming from? And maybe even deeper than that, what happened to your people? Because we know that people of color are absolutely overrepresented in the homeless population. And so we're not only talking about adverse childhood experiences, so like really crummy childhoods, but we're also talking about adverse community environments. So really crummy environments. If you're coming from poverty and that's all you've known, poverty breeds like the worst of humanity. And so what are we going to do? Like, are we going to lobby for more money to put people in isolated housing units that just end up back on the street because they want some sort of belonging? Or is there another way? And so out of all the research out of the Minnesota Design Center, Tom Fisher was incredibly kind and gracious and a great mentor to me, and said, I think you can start an organization to try to bring these ideas around. And who knows, I think I was pregnant with my second child. We're on number 3 now. And I'm like, really? I don't think this is me. And I was like, yeah, no, it's you. Go ahead. You should definitely go along with this. And so finishing a dissertation, having children, and doing this research, and then lo and behold, Settled is born. My husband lovingly calls Settled our 4th child. So we have 3 girls and Settled. So maybe Settled is the male, like, counterpart to us. I don't know. Anyway, Settled is a nonprofit because, of course, one more nonprofit in Minnesota is going to change the world. And Settled is really intended to see all the barriers that exist in the world and kind of, or all the barriers to homelessness, and then start to like wrap around them. So I'm going to go through those really quickly. So big setup, and then here you go. Number 1, people don't just lack housing, they lack family and community. They're isolated, they lack social belonging. We have to invite the most unloved, despised, unwanted of our society into something where they can grow roots and become settled. Settled. And then, so how does that happen? We can't just concentrate poverty. We have to create communities where housed and unhoused are living together intentionally, where there's people from the housing community that want to live there. We call them missional neighbors. They're on mission to love their neighbor as themselves. It's seen in the sacred texts of all the major world religions. So I think it's important, guys. I think we should pay attention to that. So missional neighbors are just intended to be a faithful presence in the community and love, and that higher commission to love your neighbor as yourself. So that's first and foremost. Number 2, affordable housing is truly not affordable. So, and there's not enough. We're losing more affordable housing than we're gaining every year, right? Can I get an amen? If we weren't on mute, I hear it. So we need to actually generate truly affordable housing. We can't be doing the $250,000 units. We need a $25,000 home. So we've made $25,000 homes. I'm going to show you what that looks like. It's pretty cute, guys. So here you go. This is our $25,000 home. You're entering into the home. Everything you see is simple, but it's high quality. You're seeing a gravity fed water tank. You're seeing a catch basin below. You're seeing a simple kitchen. You're seeing all real materials, nothing fake, real cotton, real wood. We're not giving people polyester that's not going to last. We're not giving them Teflon that's going to scratch off. We need cast iron. We need leather. We need real simple objects that feel like home. And so what you're looking at is our prototype. We lovingly call it Little Peach. We designed it and built it for 25 grand or 20 grand. And then we took 5,000 to help with overhead because everything costs money, right? So there you go. That's Little Peach for you. And then we said, we're doing a community first approach. We're going to give people social belonging. And then we're going to generate truly affordable housing, that $25,000. We're going to put it up on wheels because the state building code won't allow us to build anything under 400 square feet. So if we put it up on wheels, all of a sudden we're not beholden to building code. And then, okay, number 3, that crazy NIMBYism, not in my backyard. How are we going to overcome that? Well, by the grace of God, we found a really strong federal law called the Religious Land Use Act. And so if you're a religious organization and you can show that you want to use your land in conjunction with your mission, then those local zoning laws that really keep the poor out just kind of fall flat. So we're partnering with faith communities to establish this type of community on their land. And then we know that, people need more resource people in their social orbit. So we're putting advocate befrienders around each person, so that for every person that comes off the street, we're putting 5 resource people in their orbit to just come alongside, be good neighbors, and help connect them with social services. And then 5th, last and certainly not least, once people get into home and they feel settled and they can breathe, I'm home, right? Then what? You can't just twiddle your thumbs. Every one of us have a purpose and there's a plan for our lives. And so we need to create opportunities that people can work. They're not going to go into the mainstream kind of workforce. It's just not going to happen. Our chronically homeless folks are chronically disabled by federal definition, but they certainly have something to contribute to the world. And so we create opportunities for them to do that. So that's the pillars of a community first response to homelessness. So it's starting, we based all of this off of Austin, Texas, those faithful people down there. We kind of defined it, and now we're wanting to bring this model here to the Twin Cities. We call them sacred settlements, and we think that there's an opportunity for this to spread nationally. Now, you're all here because of post-pandemic, right? So how has the pandemic world kind of shaped and changed us? Well, I was on maternity leave because remember, I just keep having those children, and pandemic hit. I had a 3-week-old, and all of a sudden I started getting calls from the county commissioners. So I used to be banging on their doors going, hey, we got an idea, like we can do this, and here's what it is. And they're like, yeah, okay. And then pandemic hit, and they're like, we're ready to talk to you now. How many tiny homes can you build and how quickly? Because we've got 600 people that we need to get out of the shelter system tomorrow. So we said, oh yeah, that's terrible, and we're sorry. That's not really our work. We want to be thoughtful and methodical because we want this to work. And remember, we've been in this for a lot of years, so we're not willing to like give up all the good gold nuggets that we've uncovered. So we're starting slow. We're building our first sacred settlement right now. The homes are mid-construction. I'm sure I have sawdust on my hair right now. And we're building that first sacred settlement. It's at a church called Mosaic Christian Community, small, little, nimble church. But they are saying yes to this thing. They're forward facing to their community. And can you believe it? It's a church that literally is trying to love their neighbor as themselves. They're doing that to their surrounding neighbors. They're doing it to the NIMBY neighbors just as much as they're doing it to the chronically homeless. And so we'll have 6 homes there. So we're starting small. Proverbs tells us to not despise humble beginnings. So we're at humble beginnings here, but we have vision for thousands of homes, but we're starting with 6. 4 homes will be filled with people coming out of chronic homelessness. That's always individuals and couples. It's almost never families coming out of chronic homelessness. And then 2 homes are going to be filled with missional households. And so that can be families. It's resource people that have this desire calling to be a good neighbor. So that's where we are. We're mid-construction, ground floor, first sacred settlement with a vision to see this spread across the nation for people to be welcomed into a place where they're known, loved, and become settled.
Great. Thank you, Gabriel. Your enthusiasm is infectious, so appreciate it. It's wonderful to see how far we've come for the last several years. So thank you.
Hey, Tom.
Yeah. Hey, Marvin.
Marvin in New York. How are you?
I know. Hi, fine.
Maybe I could just add, that's kind of in the 90s, that's pretty much what I did, was homeless housing, affordable housing in New York City. And clearly it's an issue everywhere. We obviously deal with it at a scale that is probably beyond anything else in the city or in the country. What I found, well, first of all, you need an agency that deals with this and deals it well, but in every facility that we did, and I did quite a few of them, you have to have a social service program in the building, right? That deals with the people on an everyday basis if things come up. And I see what you guys are building in these little houses, which work. I found, and I think, and a lot of it was NIMBY, quite a bit, particularly on the Upper West Side. But in New York, it's the price of the real estate. It's how do you get people, how do you build homeless shelters, transitional or permanent, when the real estate is so expensive? And to me, there's a difference between affordable housing and housing that's affordable. I think that those are two very different things. And affordable housing is a program. Housing that's affordable is something that when communities get gentrified, etc. So I'm just wondering, in the program that Gabriel was talking about, how do you deal with this in large cities? I mean, we have an extreme issue here, right? In New York, they were all sleeping on the subways when the pandemic started. They had to get them all off the subways because they had to clean the subways so people could travel the subways, etc. And that started a whole other issue.
So thank you, Marvin. Gabriel, do you want to respond before we go on, or?
Yeah, I would say that, lots of times so we are predominantly working with faith communities using underutilized land and building and resources, including people. So we're like working through staff and existing networks, which is powerful. But a lot of, we're also developing a sacred settlement in Forest Lake, and people say, oh my gosh, you're taking them away from the social services. Well, most of our homeless population are all concentrated in the Twin Cities, but that's not necessarily where they grew up or where they originated. It's just we've like herded them like cattle to here because that's where all the services are. But what if we start to distribute and start to create communities outside? So what if you were to, I suppose that many of the people in New York City don't necessarily want to be in New York City. They might really enjoy being further out, but you have to be able to create enough of a community that it makes sense for them to live outside of where the social services are. And so I would say that the idea there is to create kind of, you have your hub, but you need to really create spokes and start to, deconcentrate the population so that you can create healthy, thriving, good communities. And I think that the faith communities, are a key to this. They have buildings, they have land, 30% of giving in America goes to faith communities. And of that, 90% of it is used on building and land and HR. So let's use all of that stored up treasure and with already existing infrastructure to really build up real strong, true, intentional communities.
Great. Okay, I think we do have to move on. Marvin, I think we have two other speakers. So can you hold your next question?
One more question, Tom. All right. Well, given all the experience that you have in Gary, can you bring some of that to New York City? I think it's critical here. You've learned a lot. It sounds wonderful.
Thank you, Marvin. Yes, let's connect after this. Absolutely.
Try and, if you can bring a lot of that knowledge and information to New York City, I think it would be really, really important and a significant thing to happen here, because I don't think anybody's on the move to solving it. So yeah. Come to New York. I can give you my phone number. You can give me a call. I'd be happy to show you.
Okay. Well, right. Yeah, good. Thank you, Marvin. Thanks, Gabriel. Let's move on to Jacob Mans, who's our next speaker, a faculty member in the School of Architecture, and he's been working with the health community and doing other things of interest around this topic. So Jacob, you're on.
Just a second, Tom. You see my screen okay? We're good?
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
Thanks, Gabriel, and Tom and everybody else for kicking this off. I want to talk a little bit about this idea of co-production and what we might be co-producing alongside of the production of housing, extremely affordable housing, to help solve the homelessness crisis that we're moving through. And I also want to frame that within a project that I've been working on with Tom and others called the Envision Community in the Twin Cities. I'm presenting the project, but it's a pretty huge project team, and I'll get into that and the work that we've done moving forward. One of the things I would like to frame the conversation through is this idea of detailing the details. I think architects look a lot at the design of things, the space of things, the way in which materials are coming together into a building. And I think that scale of thinking might not be big enough to take on some of the issues that we're looking at right now, some of the systemic issues that bring about situations like the homelessness crisis or the affordable housing crisis. I think it's in the process of those details. It's in the processes of production. It's in the systems that put people in vulnerable spaces that that we have to be taking on as designers. And I'm trying to find a way of kind of framing a design project through that detailing of the details, a kind of step back and looking at architecture as something much larger than just a building, and trying to understand it as a kind of nested system that's attached to planetary systems, you know, landscapes, definitely urbanisms, people, technology, different forms of building production. But I think it's somehow, you know, in looking in some of these other scales, these other systems that are attached to the production of housing, that we might find some added value in producing affordable housing solutions. So to frame that conversation, I want to just share some of the work that we've done to date on the project, the Envision Community Project. I'm going to go through what we've built out, and I want to talk then at the end about some of these ideas of how we might pull in, you know, other systems and other ways of thinking to help kind of enhance the affordability of the housing that we're working on. So this is a very recent rendering that we've done just in the last couple of months, looking at various sites in the Twin Cities to locate our housing project. It consists of a common house with a series of small dwelling units. That's what makes up our intentional community cluster. There's a service house and some kind of added utilities, and then there's a series of smaller dwelling units that get attached to that service house. But you know, to get to that place, it's been a very long journey. Gabriel and Tom were already talking about the research that led to the development of this project. This started out as a collaboration with Hennepin Healthcare and trying to understand, you know, the costs of providing healthcare to people who are homeless, and how could we leverage those monies to produce these intentional supportive cluster communities to house people. And all along the way, we've been very focused and very conscious about actually involving the people who would be living in this community in the process of design. So the image right here is showing a group of people from Street Voices for Change, a really important advocacy, designer-oriented group of people who have been helping us along the way make decisions with regards to the kind of development at large, to the kinds of people that want to be kind of allowed to participate in living within these communities. And then they've also been helping, you know, make very specific design decisions and actually build the units, which I think is a really important piece of this. So this is what we're trying to do. This is kind of the initial goal for the project. We're looking to do a kind of demonstration project to show people this model of housing and to test the economics behind it. We're looking to house 15 to 30 people in small units located in the city of Minneapolis, because we've been working quite a bit, as I'll talk, with the city of Minneapolis to augment the zoning regulations so that we can build these types of developments. And then we want to provide supportive services on site as well. And we're trying to find ways of kind of coupling or locating certain services and particular pieces of the design and kind of minimizing the cost of having, you know, services elsewhere in the projects. And this work is being done, these drawings were done by Alchemy Architects. So I want to just be clear, it's, you know, I'm presenting this work, but it really has been kind of a very large community-driven project in the Twin Cities with multiple design centers and design firms involved. This is the unit that we started working on. We got funding from the POLAD Foundation in the Twin Cities to test some of our initial ideas about creating a smaller space that's designed with input from people who have lived experience with homelessness, and what would that look like and what would that feel like. And being, you know, faculty at the University of Minnesota, you know, also working with our students to help design and build this, letting them interact with people who have lived experience with homelessness, and build with them. So in these images, you can see students from the University of Minnesota, working alongside of volunteers from Street Voices of Change to actually build a unit, build part of the prototype unit out in a design workshop that we hosted in 2019 at the University of Minnesota in the spring. So it's not only like building the units, but it's building capacity within our design students to look at designing solutions for maybe a different community that designers haven't been focused on for a very long time. That unit then had to be kind of disassembled because we temporarily built it in the school, and we moved it actually to a separate location so that we could build it out. And we built the full unit with members from the community. So this is us now up in actually northern Minnesota, where I'm at, in Hinckley, which is about 90 minutes north of the Twin Cities, because we had difficulty in the near term finding permitting permissions to be able to locate our temporary structure. It just didn't fit within the city's temporary permitting guidelines, but we wanted to continue moving the work forward. So we brought the project north and we built it in greater Minnesota. Members from the Street Voices of Change team in the Twin Cities came to greater Minnesota and worked with people in greater Minnesota to finish building out the unit. It's a panelized SIPS panel structure, so it went up fairly quickly. And over the course of the year, we built out the unit. Just kind of going through some images here. And then once we finally received our kind of permitting permissions, we moved it down there then the next summer. So this is us shipping the unit down to the Twin Cities. And this is it in its current location at Elam Church, just northwest of the University of Minnesota. And that permitting issue is, I think, something that a lot of people doing this kind of work are coming up against. And every single person is having to solve it on their own. Alchemy Architects, Jeff Werner, kind of warned that we would come up against these issues. He talked about, stories of trying to get these small structures permitted. And we ran up against the same issues, but luckily for us, we had been developing this extended community of practice and working with partners from the city of Minneapolis, and actually working with the city to amend their zoning so that we could build out our intentional cluster community. Cam Gordon's office and people from the planning department helped draft up language and helped push through an amendment that allowed for smaller building footprints. It allowed us to put higher density units on a double lot anywhere in Minneapolis. And it allowed us to also think a little bit differently about how we were defining different units. So not every single unit that was being lived in, for example, needs to have a kitchen or a bathroom now, because we amended the language to allow just rooming units, so long as there's a supportive utility common house on site that people can also use. And we're trying to think of these strategies to help drive down the cost of individual housing units. Utilities and systems are really expensive, but if we can cluster those into a common house space, then we can drive down the cost of individual rooming units. And we're also still in the, to Marvin's comment about finding land to build these on, we've been working for 2 years to find land. We think we now have found a parcel of land, and we're working on securing that. Just maintaining the project over the course of 2 years has been a very, intensive project. A lot of fundraising and grant writing going on behind the scenes to maintain the overhead of the project. As Gabrielle was talking about, there are a lot of people involved, and finding ways to support those people financially as we work out these issues is really, really important. And that's where the project is today, right? We've designed the unit with the homeless communities. We've built the unit with the homeless communities. We have the unit now in the Twin Cities, and we're showing stakeholders and investors what it would look like. We've worked with the city of Minneapolis to amend their zoning so that we can build our development. And now we're in the process of procuring land and then hopefully in the near future, building out this kind of 15 to 30 person test development to see how it works out and to see if the financial model that we've built the project on is legitimate. And in doing this, I want to just kind of go back to this idea of extended communities of practice and reaching out even further, because I think even in what we've done to date, we're not talking about a big enough systems boundary to add the value to the project and to bring down the cost of building it that we need to. So this is getting back into this idea for conversation about co-producing housing, detailing the details, and looking at construction and material sourcing and how we could think about construction and material sourcing at a different scale to help add value to the project and drive down costs. And this is looking at some research that Tom and I have been doing with research assistants, but trying to find ways of tapping into local economic development models, finding different roles for the architect to engage with local communities in the way that they're procuring and working with local materials, as opposed to just sourcing specific materials through specifications and drawings, but a different kind of engagement. And one of the things that we're kind of landing on right now is a strategy for a prefabricated utility core. So thinking differently about how and where we're building components of the building, putting all the services into a dense core and then building simple structures around it. That's one really important piece. We've been working with the city and the state actually on this level, and have gotten some kind of early permissions in our prototyping a second unit, utilizing some of this new technology that we've been developing around strategic utilities, with the idea then that it doesn't matter what the architecture looks like, so long as we have this smarter system of making housing work at a small scale. Like the house could be anything that it needs to. We're showing small kind of modern looking boxes, but Gabriel's projects look much differently. James's projects are going to look different yet again. But this might be a shared piece of technology, a shared solution that we could develop at scale to save costs on, and kind of save some of the pain for each individual project having to do its own design work. And then another thing that I want to kind of end with is Greater Minnesota. It's a huge resource. We have a huge timber resource, material resource in Minnesota that I think is really underutilized. And if we began to expand our systems thinking about this project, I think that we could tap into some really difficult forest management times that the state is going through. We had a really strong paper and pulping industry that is now not doing so well. But that's a lot of material and a lot of economic opportunities in Greater Minnesota if we could think of ways to tap into those materials differently. The University of Minnesota has some funding from the U.S. Forest Service to think about new building products using low quality timber resources to minimize forest fire risk. So is there a way to co-produce a more resilient forest for saving on costs of firefighting, for example? I mean, take a look at what's happening out west, think of the costs associated with that, and begin developing housing based on a forest management program that would save on other costs. And then could we think of a way of co-producing that solution and take some of the resources that might have gone into fighting forest fires or managing something else, but we're producing buildings in a way that would minimize that. Perhaps that could be used to offset some of the costs of housing as well. So trying to add value to the product of housing to bring down its overall cost. And this is some work that we're doing right now. We've been developing some panels, and we're in the process of building out a second prototype, utilizing both the kind of utility core idea that I shared prior to this, and then also building out using local, low quality Minnesota wood resources, long lasting, heavy timber, basically small buildings that help us manage our forests to produce better kind of large scale ecosystems, and at the same time provide local job opportunities in Greater Minnesota that could then be used to drive down the cost of housing in the Twin Cities. So that's where I want to leave it. My question is, how can we co-produce solutions to these challenges? We look at them individually. I think it's going to be very difficult to have the value add solution that we need to, but if we can start talking about housing as a solution for ecosystems management, and leverage the connection between the two to also generate jobs in places that are hurting economically, then I think we can co-produce solutions that would be beneficial to multiple systems at multiple scales. And that, to me, is the direction that we need to be looking in a post-pandemic world. When these issues are coming at us in unexpected ways, it can't be single solutions. It has to be extending our design networks and trying to co-solve at multiple levels to get around some of the cost challenges and environmental impact challenges that we have to deal with in the next 10, 20, 50 years as a society and as a design community. So I'll leave it there.
Great. Thank you, Jacob. I'm always impressed by how you work from the sort of global scale down to the building detail. Your ability to jump so many scales is really incredible. So thank you. Let's move to our third speaker, James Garrett, who's a principal and founder of Formula Architects in St. Paul, who has been doing some fabulous work in the Twin Cities related to supportive housing for people who have been experiencing homelessness. So, James.
Yes, thanks, Tom. I appreciate you inviting me to share some of my work with this forum. I'd like to jump in. can everybody kind of see
Yeah.
where we're at? So essentially, the subject that I wanted to talk about today is rooted in the promises, possibilities, and limitations of progressive supportive housing models for unsheltered Minnesotans. One of the things that I've learned through my work is that, maybe echoing what Jacob said, there is no one size fits all solution. There is no silver bullet that is going to magically solve all of these problems. And there's a level of complexity with the unsheltered populations here in Minnesota and also in New York, where I've lived, that goes beyond what anything most of us can imagine. So there's everything from restrictions in shelters to different qualifications in different municipalities in different states to receive aid for shelter. People having mental health challenges, people having challenges with addiction and chemical dependency, and any sort of series of intersections of these fundamental problems and challenges that folks face is really what's leading to this problem. And we're going to have to find creative ways to really solve some of those individual societal challenges if we're ever going to hope to wrap our arms around and create long-lasting solutions for unsheltered folks here in Minnesota and beyond. The project that I want to sort of submit as a case study for finding a creative solution to this challenge that we face, it's called Great River Landing. It's in the North Loop of Minneapolis on 5th Street. Just beyond Target Field Station, a stone's throw from downtown Minneapolis. This project is essentially 72 units of supportive housing that is for men who have been homeless or at risk of homelessness due to prior incarceration. So we're dealing with a very specific population that faces trauma and has been out of the loop for quite a while, has been 5, 10, 20 years or more away from their family and away from their community. The way that we approached this challenge was an opportunity to design a team, first and foremost, that was diverse, that was inclusive, and that provided for a wide variety of expertise. And we did this by centering the formula team of myself, Nathan Johnson, Lissa Washington, Paola Sanchez Garrett, and Michael Lima in our sort of best roles to be able to effectively move forward with solutions, creative solutions for this problem. I was the design architect. Nate was the pragmatic solution maker, project architect. Lissa was our very detail-oriented project manager. My wife, Paola, was technical support. She did all of our details for our exterior wall system and high performance wall system, and Michael Lima backed me up as project designer. So we had our core team together, but we knew that there were some things that we needed to add to create a more robust team to handle this particular series of challenges that was we were presented with. So the first person that we added was Rosemary Delata, who was with Concentric Architecture at the time. Rosemary is a specialist in affordable housing compliance. She's worked through the paperwork side of things. She knows the ins and outs of housing requirements, and she added a lot of value to our team in terms of being able to help us through the regulatory processes and making sure that we were vetting the designs we were coming up with against some of the funding realities that were going to face our developer, our housing developer client. And possibly the most important person that we brought into the team to work on this particular problem was Roger Cummings, who's a community-based visual artist, one of my best friends going back to high school, and co-founder of Juxtaposition Arts in Minneapolis. We believe that there's a healing power and property in art that could help really advance the project of healing and supporting these men in their journeys, trying to reintegrate themselves into this city, into this community, and into society. So with that said, we had an added challenge because we essentially had co-clients, right? So Beacon Interfaith Housing Collaborative was our developer client. They were responsible for project management, financing, putting together the capital stack to be able to execute this project. And then we had Better Futures Minnesota, who is a local service provider that actually will be living on site with the men. The men are from their program, which looks to challenge homelessness by providing job training, providing employment, providing housing, and providing specific social services on site that will support the men in their journey to advancement. So we had to sort of please two masters in this context, and it led for some very interesting challenges, but also some creative problem solving to get us through. One of the main things that we believe in is stakeholder engagement is crucial and critical, not just at the beginning of the project, but throughout the design process, in order to end up with a result that is going to have the best opportunity to hit the target, to hit the mark that you've set for it. One of the things that we thought was important is that in this project and in every project we do, that we don't just engage the quote owner, right? The developer, right? The quote decision maker, but we engage the leadership, we engage the staff, and we engage the end users to the highest degree possible. And so in this respect, we actually spent very little time dealing with the leadership and the ownership, and we spent the majority of our time, we spent 5 sessions actually really engaging with the men who would potentially be living there. And so that was something that was very challenging for folks that are used to being centered in the process, that are used to sort of being able to sort of just dictate this, that, yes, no. We wanted to sort of de-emphasize that aspect of the project, and we wanted to really add value and add weight to the voices of the underrepresented folks who are going to be living there and working there on a daily basis. This didn't go over well with everybody, but most people really leaned into the process. You can kind of see in this photo, there's one person that's not leaning into the process, and that person was a pain in our ass for the entire project. This is an example of one of the engagement sessions, actually 2 of the engagement sessions. On the top is the first engagement session that we saw on the last slide, where Roger worked closely with the leadership from both organizations. And we really tried to set up some parameters for, you know, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, why are you guys doing this very difficult, challenging work, what are you in it for, and created buttons that people were able to wear to all subsequent meetings that basically said that this is what my value is, this is what I believe in. And we held people to those things, right? We gave them the opportunity to define their role in this process, and then we did our best to hold each other accountable. On the bottom is really the second meeting, which was dedicated towards staff, primarily staff of Better Futures, but then also there was staff from Beacon as well. And so doing fun activities, getting your hands busy, a lot of the learning and the engagement happens through conversation. and being able to just talk through things and to be able to actually anticipate problems and challenges that are going to arise throughout the process, and being able to find creative ways to solve them together. And so this is a practice run. The majority of the engagement sessions, though, were focused on the men. Roger designed really creative activities for the men in the program to be able to express themselves, to be able to respond to questions that I would pose about family, belonging, acceptance. These types of principles are things that may seem very mundane to a lot of us, but for men that have been in the position that these men have been in, a lot of times nobody has ever asked their opinion about anything and nonetheless listened to them. And so actually putting them in a position where they're centered in the conversation and that their lived experience is something that is important, it's significant, it's valued, and respected, was part of the healing process. And we wanted to start that early and often. There's a lot of things that we were able to learn from the men going through this process. And it was really, it was extremely valuable for us, I think on a human level, but also on the level of they provided a lot of actionable design intel that would allow us to move forward and design a structure and a facility that would best serve their needs. One of Roger's responsibilities through this process was to document, to graphically and visually document the different conversations that he had with the men throughout this series of 5 two-hour sessions that we had with them. Those sessions ran parallel throughout the schematic design process from start to finish. And we were able to really, again, learn some actionable things that we would be able to use and integrate into the design. These are just 3 examples here: love, faith, and family support. 3 of the pictograms that Roger kind of came up with out of the dozen or so that he made. These 3 we thought were really important and significant, and I wanted him to further develop them. These other 3 were also very significant. They were themes that were recurring and kept coming up in the conversations: acceptance, future change, and inclusion. So we really looked at those 6 things, and we decided to develop those into artworks, original artworks that could be then integrated into the architecture, the physical architecture itself. This is an example of one of the ideas that we had early on for how to integrate, in this case, it's the faith piece. We abstracted it, cut it into strips, and stretched it throughout the length and the height of the front entry. We wanted to make a really strong statement about entry and about people coming home. And that was one of the critiques that we had of a lot of the existing affordable housing, low-income housing, and supportive housing projects that we studied in the run-up to this, is that oftentimes there's no clear architectural delineation of how to approach the space and how to enter the space. And so we wanted to solve that problem and then go far, far beyond that with an artistic expression that came out of the actual engagement, that was really an extension of the feelings and the feedback of the men in the program. So this is a photograph of how it came out, how the front entry sort of turned out. We wanted prominent signage, and we wanted to be able to create an artwork that started to really blend into the architecture and become inextricably tied to the facade of the building. We were able to do that through custom perforated metal panels, which we side lit with color changing LED technology. And we really created something that the men have control of. They can change the color of this space, of this exterior and the interior lobby space. It can serve to be an expression of the mood that they're in. It can serve to celebrate different holidays or occasions that they think are special. And it's just one example of many where we try to give them some control over their micro and macro environment, often for the first time. On the immediate entry sequence, you can see the front doors as you sort of pass through the front entry to get into the building. We created this interior wood canopy form, which sort of serves as a threshold that allows them to sort of psychologically leave whatever challenges that they face in the outside world at the door. And as they enter through this sort of portal or this threshold, they are now into home, they're into their own space. The materials that we used were very specific. We used wood, reclaimed wood specifically, and even more specifically than that, we used reclaimed wood that the men themselves pulled out of abandoned homes and farms and structures through the deconstruction work that they learn how to do, that they're trained in doing and they're employed in doing every day. So we actually pressed the contractor to actually purchase the reclaimed wood that we used in this front entry from the Better Futures itself, from their reuse center itself, which was another controversial thing because it could be bought, we were made aware that it could be bought a few cents cheaper from these other guys' suppliers. But it was really important for us, for the self-esteem, for the purpose of what this project means to people, that this particular wood from these particular men's work be something that is empowered and sort of centered and brought forth into this process. The other thing that we heard from the men, which I thought was really fascinating, was that when this was under construction and we purchased the wood from them and the installation was about to begin, they made it very clear to me, they wanted me to know that they don't want this lobby space to look too perfect, right? They said that we're imperfect people. Our lives are not perfect. We've gone through a lot, but we feel like we're still beautiful. We feel like there's beauty through imperfection. So please consider that when you're designing this space. So we took that to heart. One of the things that we did with all of the wood in the public areas was that we mixed and matched different wood species. We mixed and matched and created a mosaic of different board lengths. And we basically used whatever finish came out of the building, the previous building. So we didn't add any additional finishing to it. And so there's kind of a rough look and feel that the men really gravitated towards. And they said, this is it, this is what they want. So this is just a look at the wood that's used on the reception desk in the lobby space. This is just another view of the wood canopy. This is turning and looking beyond, sort of along this wood canopy that welcomes you and brings you into community space. This community space is a place where the guys gather. They're able to socialize when they're not working. They eat every day here. There's a catering service that brings food into a warming kitchen, and then they basically are able to line up and get their food buffet style. And most of the men choose to sit here and socialize during mealtime, but they always have the option to go up to their individual rooms if they're just not feeling social. Excuse me. So they have an opportunity to exert control over their environment. And those little choices and those decisions are things that a lot of the guys have to learn how to make again, because they just didn't have those options when they were incarcerated. This space is really important. This is adjacent to the lobby. This is a classroom space. Most of their training is done either on the job site or in this classroom space. So we wanted this space to be very visible from Fifth Street. We wanted people in the North Loop neighborhood to see these guys studying and learning and trying to better themselves. We wanted to put on display the positive aspects of what these guys are and what they do. This space is adjacent to the classroom. This is a 24-hour workout facility. It's small but mighty. A lot of these guys have suffered trauma during their time in incarceration and their time on the streets, unsheltered. And so one of the things that was really important to the client, is that we provide a way for them to have an accessible means of working through that stress through physical activity. So there's treadmill, stair climber, boxing, punching bags, anything that you need, and there's 24-hour access. This space is also significant. It is a conference room, but it is also a future showroom. So the men in the program are learning how to make furniture out of the reclaimed materials that come out of the reuse center. And so in the future, this will be a showroom, and it will have all different manner and variety of examples of the work that the men have done. Again, we're showing off with this reclaimed wood. This is all wood that these guys have reclaimed and pulled up from the reuse center. And this door to the street is going to be the portal to the neighbors, and it's going to give them an opportunity to come in and get to know these guys through the work that they produce, and get to understand them as the guys that do the cool furniture and not just the mysterious ex-offenders that live in our neighborhood, right? So we wanted to try to do everything that we could to change those paradigms, and that space is going to have a big, I think, opportunity in the future to help do that. Roger and I sat down to coordinate an art plan where we looked at very specific ways of integrating the artworks that he had created into the building itself. So you saw on the exterior how we were able to abstract and integrate the faith piece into that entry sequence. But another thing that we did that was really low cost and allowed us to really maximize the creativity of the interior space was that we chose a color theme for each floor, so that the floors were no longer denoted by numbers and letters, as pretty much everything was denoted by letters and numbers during their time incarcerated. We wanted to flip that and to change that paradigm and denote everything with color and with art and with purpose and intention. And so starting on the ground floor, we started color themes and pictogram schemes that move vertically up through the building into through the elevator and stair lobbies, all the way up through the residential portions of the building. So this is the first piece. It's called Love. It grounds the structure. It starts in the garage, and it's the first thing a lot of the guys will enter the space through the work van, which oftentimes at night parks in the secured garage, underground garage space. So a lot of guys, when they come home every day, the first thing that they see is Love. This is immediately adjacent to the reception desk in the lobby. This is called Faith. If you notice, there are didactics associated with each of these. The main didactic here in the lobby explains the process. A lot of the men that are living here even now have transitioned into different housing solutions. And so they weren't part of the original creation of these artworks, but we wanted to leave a legacy and the breadcrumbs for future residents of the building, that they understand that there was something that was done specifically for them, and that that's what these things symbolize, and that there is a significance to each one. The individual piece and the description of the individual piece is on the left side. It's a small didactic on the left side on each floor. So again, you see that didactic here on the second floor. This piece is called Acceptance, and it really sets the table again for a level of understanding and healing on a daily basis. When these guys come in, it's the first thing they see when they get to their floor. It's the last thing they see when they leave their floor every day. Also on the second floor, this is another space that grew out of direct engagement with the men throughout the process that we created. This is a children's playroom. It looks a little bit different now. Formula had, over last holiday season, donated a bunch of toys and games and Legos and books and such to really make this space a fun space for kids to be able to spend their supervised custody with their parents in a fun, engaging environment that is all about the kids. It centers the kids in the experience. That is something that was very clear. Every single engagement session that we did, the kids were something that was referred to every single time. And we realized that this space really was about family, and it wasn't just about these individual men. So we were early enough in the design process, because we were working in tandem through schematic design, that we could borrow a few feet from here and squeeze the corridor a little bit, and actually create some of the spaces that we learned were really significant, that didn't appear in the initial program that we were given from the client, but that occurred because of the engagement with the men. So this is the children's area. This is a lounge space. It's a double height lounge space. We wanted to make a really robust attempt at creating a lounge space that was big enough to hold all the men at the same time, so that they could have communal activities, they could have movie nights, they could watch football, basketball games together. These are all things that they were unable to do because of the tiny size, the really insufficient size of the space that they were previously living in. So this is a look at the third floor piece of the loft there. And again, there's a secondary space with additional TVs, so multiple guys can be doing multiple things at the same time. Also on the third floor, this is the artwork. This is family support. And this was another really important piece that guys really rallied around and is really significant to them. This is an example also on the third floor of a typical SRO style unit. About half of the units are SRO style, like this, studio efficiency, apartment style, independent living. The other units are set aside for men that are just entering the program, and they're more of a communal living. They're 4 bedrooms with a shared kitchen and dining and living space. So this is just a look at the kitchen. MnCore did the cabinets. MnCore also sort of ties in with the mission of the organization. There are men that are incarcerated that are learning carpentry and learning how to build cabinetry. And so the greatest thing about this that I love is it goes with the theme. It's a little bit imperfect. You can see the stain on some of the wood is a little bit off, but it adds character and it adds value, and it tells you that it's human made. It was touched by actual people who are imperfect and that are still learning their craft. This is the next floor. This is called Inclusion. This is another really awesome piece by Roger Cummings. Also on this floor, we have meditation spaces. On the upper 2 floors and at each end of the building, we created these small spaces for men to meditate, to pray, and we also started to learn about the conflict resolution strategies and techniques that they were learning, and that they needed a place to be able to retreat from conflict sometimes, instead of constantly feeling like they have to stand and fight. Sometimes you need to be able to de-escalate a situation by leaving and having a space to decompress and to relax and to just, chill out a little bit. And so these spaces are actually multifunctional spaces. They're some of the most used and most loved spaces in the building, which I find fascinating. But from the first time the first set of guys started to move into the building, even when we were doing punch listing, we would see coffee mugs, and we would see cups and empty drink containers on that windowsill. Guys were really using this space from day one. This was something that they really appreciate and they really get a lot of use out of. Finally, on the top residential floor, this is a piece called Future Change. And it talks about guys that are really trying to make these changes so that they can return back to their communities and their neighborhoods, to be the men that they want to be for their families and for their communities. So this is an early rendering of the building, actually the final rendering of the building as we were going through the permitting process. This is what we use for fundraising. This is kind of how the building turned out. This is a view from that same vantage point, looking east down 5th Street. This is that sort of opposite view looking west from 5th Street. You can see on the corner is the big community space. It's always occupied. There's always guys in there interacting and socializing and eating in that space. This is that same view from the daytime. So you can see Roger's piece sort of integrated into the orange and the silver metal panel system. This is a view just beyond as you sort of go down the driveway towards the rear of the building. There's a small parking deck in the rear of the building. This is the rear elevation. You can see pretty prominently here in this elevation, there's a balcony that is actually also very popular. It's sort of the smoking lounge that a lot of the guys use to smoke. It's a smoke-free, alcohol-free, drug-free building. And so this opens out from their lounge space, the second floor lounge space. You can also see this space here is another one of the spaces that's dedicated to kids and families. And we have a lawn and we have a small play area for toddlers so that guys, again, can have that supervised visitation with their kids, and they have a proper place, a quiet, private moment where they can really hang out with their kids and start to rebuild those bonds and connections. And it's also something that it's very visible and it's centered, and other people can look out and see guys playing with their kids and be thinking about reconnecting with their own families.
James, hi, this is Tom. I think we're running a bit late here. So
Okay.
can you wrap up?
Yep. So just wrapping up, I think this is one of my favorite views of the building. It kind of shows a vantage point that gives you everything that is important about the building. The most important thing for me was that we were able to get a solar PV array on the roof. We have 122 Hanwha photovoltaic panels. They produce a large part of the building's electricity. I don't have the actual numbers in terms of how much they produce, but they're productive. They've been in use for a year, and this is all I got. Thank you.
Great, good. Yeah, thank you, James. Impressive project. Well, thank you, everybody who's joined us. We can stay around if you have any questions. And we can also, we'll be recording it. So if you want to, if you have to leave, feel free to do that and we can send you the recording. Does anyone have any questions? Actually, Jacob had to leave, but Gabriel's here with her little one and James is still here. And does anyone have any questions for either?
Tom, there was a question earlier that I think Gabriel responded to about support structures. So I think, I hope that was answered, but feel free to ask if there's more.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
I had a question for James. James, what is the experience of the men living there? I know you talked about it in connection with the design, but I felt there were connecting threads between what Gabriel said and what you presented about the sense of belonging and actually recognition. So I'm just interested to see if you made any observations based on that.
Yeah, and I think that ties in with the overall theme. I think there's also some limitations of what we can do as architects. And I think we need to be clear about that. We can sort of set up the conditions for interaction and growth and connection to happen, but we're limited in what we can do. We can't solve these problems, and physical spatial manipulation will not make a dent in this problem, this pernicious challenge that we have. For instance, we were able to create a space that really fostered a sense of community. Every time that I've been in that space pre-pandemic, there was a great sense of sort of camaraderie and people were really upbeat. They felt really good about having a permanent space to be in. They were comfortable. The most important thing, though, was that they had staff and leadership that cared and really helped provide structure for the men in the program. That changed pre-pandemic, right on the cusp of the pandemic. The CEO of Better Futures stepped down. His number 2 in command, who was another really strong leader and big supporter of the men, he left as well. 2 of the other people that were really solid service providers took jobs in other locations. And then the pandemic hit and things kind of went into a bit of free fall. So there were 2 guys that ended up testing positive for COVID during the height of the lockdown that we had this spring. One of the guys had some PTSD flashbacks and reacted really negatively and violently to sort of being in lockdown. He felt like he was reliving his incarceration, and he kicked out and smashed out the windows in his unit right on 5th Street there. And so for a long period of time, if you went past the building, there was plywood up in one of the upper floor windows. And that's because a man had a mental incident, mental health issue incident, and really caused damage to himself in the building. So Great River Landing has been struggling. The window has been replaced now. There's new staff that has replaced the staff that was there, but the feel is not the same right now there. And you know, there's a lot of challenges. There's maintenance issues and challenges. There's when there's upheaval and change, and when things aren't right from the programming side, you know, the architecture can't save it, right? And so there are a lot of limitations. We can do everything we can do and put our, you know, heart and soul into something, but if the partnerships aren't in place, if the support services change or aren't up to par, or if leadership exits and there's a lot of uncertainty, there can be a lot of challenges, especially with vulnerable populations.
Mhm. Yep. And Gabriel, how are you addressing that with the faith community? Some of the challenges that James just talked about. You're on mute here. Gabriel, you're on mute.
Sorry, about COVID or mental illness?
Well, yeah, and about, you know, the challenges that this population may be facing during the pandemic.
Yeah. Sure. So a few different ways. We have a partner organization that goes and serves the unsheltered several times a week, and we go camp to camp to meet them face to face, story to story. So we've built trusted relationships with people while still on the streets. And so we kind of know what they struggle with. We know their backgrounds, so we can be sensitive to that. But we also have put together a very comprehensive and in-depth training for faith community leaders, as well as missionals and advocate offenders, so that everyone is going into this eyes wide open. You know, because most of us don't have experience with, you know, someone like pooping off their porch when they're having like a mental health kind of crisis. And so, you know, we talk through those things. We talk about healthy boundaries and mental illness and adverse childhood experiences and trauma, and we talk through it all so that, you know, we don't have to just root out poverty because it's different and other and it's scary and we don't understand it. We can just educate ourselves, and so that people feel prepared for situations. Obviously we can't prepare everyone for every situation, but we can at least we can understand like those values and understand, have greater empathy from where people are coming from and how we can respond and help.
Good, thank you. Well, I think we're well past time, so maybe we should wrap up. And again, thank you, James and Gabriel and Jacob, who had to leave early. And thanks to everybody for coming. We really appreciate your taking part in this series. And as you can see from this slide, our next webinar will be on November 24th. So stay tuned. And Abby and Virajita, thank you too. Appreciate your co-hosting here. And these are important issues, so really appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Yeah, bye-bye, everybody. Thank you
Bye-bye.
for coming.
Thank you.